All right, we are going to be making this animation today. This is definitely an early access tutorial. At some point, this will be on YouTube in the next week or so. But I wanted to get this out to you guys as part of the larger collection. So the whole set of tutorials could be here on Patreon and you guys get it early. So I think there's like 4 more tutorials to come after this. So let's dive right into it. I'm going to be using 4.3.2 with Blender. A lot of this is basic. I'm not sure how much of this is like super new tech, but it'll be standard for most people's Blender. We are going to start out with a plane, and we're going to first model the spiral that we can see going around it. So I'm just going to double click on the outline and call it spiral. And then we're going to head into geometry nodes, and I am going to set up my windows a little bit differently. I still have yet to set up my Blender preferences since rebuilding my whole computer. So this is normally how I like to have my setup in geometry nodes. So we're going to click new, and we are going to get a curve spiral right there, and we will replace the input to be here. We're going to go ahead on the height and give it a height of 0. We're going to do rotations of 50 rotations. This is our spiral right now. Right now, I'm just going to give it a resolution of 100. We're going to bump that up to 500 by the time we're ending, just so it's not low poly. We're going to do a start radius of 0.8, and we're going to do an end radius of 3.2. And then our sphere is going to hop right here in the middle. So let's just throw our icosphere and subdivide them. All right, there we go. So we have that. Let's go back to this because our priority right now is making him. So now that we have this spiral ready to go, let's go ahead and displace it. So we're going to get a set position node, and I want to displace it only on the Z. So we're going to get a combined XYZ node so we can sort of show these values, and we're going to get a wave texture. So plug in color to Z, and it's going to do that. So we want to be able to adjust the strength of the displacement. We're going to go ahead and get a math node and set that math node to multiply, and that will adjust that. Now we can see the wave texture doing what it does. Like this. You can see the waves are going this direction. I want to go in a circular pattern. So we're going to go from bands to rings and then X to spherical. And if I play with my phase offset, you can see like it's a very obvious like spherical displacement. I do like the displacement going in the sphere. I do want a little bit more randomness. If I bring up the scale, it's going to kind of do this, which is the nature of the sphere, I mean the wave node. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a spline parameter to kind of dictate the mapping of it. And so what we can do is just, and this spline parameter recognizes this spiral here. So just going to change the way it behaves, and you'll see it work once we plug it in. So plug factor into vector, and then it's still treating it circularly. It's still a wave texture, but now if I play with the phase offset, it now kind of moves the wave in this circular pattern, and that's exactly what I want. And then we can kind of adjust the level of displacement within it. I just want the wires to have a little bit of up and down character, but I don't want it too crazy. And then we'll bring up our scale here, and then now when we animate, it'll just look like this rather than these waves going in and outward to the sort of planet in the middle. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of geometry to this. So we're going to go ahead and get a curve to mesh node. We're going to get a curved circle to dictate the profile. So we're going to go a radius of 0.005, resolution of 6. We don't really need a whole lot of resolution for this. And then we'll plug it right into the curve. Actually, I'm going to change it to 0.002. What I want to do now is to kind of have a set of some of these wires that have an emission material on it, but like a very few amount of them. And the way I decided to do that was to create another set of curve spiral. So what I'm going to do is get a join geometry, because we are going to join a new set of nodes. So we'll plug that here. I'm going to get a new curve spiral. I'm going to plug it in here. and we could see it now, but we need to actually add in a set position node. We're going to grab these two, the multiply and the combine X, Y, Z, and we'll plug that in the offset, and then we'll use the same wave texture, and this is going to be convenient and plug into the top socket there. This is going to be convenient so that when we do animate it, both of our curves are going to be animated, which is going to be far more convenient. Now, it's just a duplicate right now. We can't actually see the new wire. So what I want to do, right now it's 50 rotations. I'm going to bring it down to 10 rotations, and now we can see our new wire. We need to bring that strength of the effect down a little bit, and then we can just do another curve to mesh, get another curved circle, and bring that radius down to like 0.0005 maybe, and we'll plug that there. So now we have this really small curve amongst the bigger curves, and that is what we're going to use to apply a different an emission material. So what I'm going to do now is just highlight these guys and hit G. And just to visually separate them, I'm going to hit Control J. I'm not even going to name it. I just want to see a visual separation of the two nodes. So what we want to do now, what I want to do now is randomly instance some spheres on the bigger spiral curve. So what we have to do now is get a instance on points node. We'll just make some room down here and then plug it into the join geometry. And then what we'll do is plug this. This is the bigger spiral with the 50 rotations. We will plug that set position node right into points. And what this is going to do is when we instance the points, instance the spheres on these curves, the spheres are going to stay on the curve like they're tracked to it. So that's what we want. We're going to do an icosphere. Now, before I plug this in, this is going to create a lot of points because it's very highly subdivided and it's a lot of points. What I want to do first is delete some of the original geometry. So what we can do is get a delete geometry node, and it's just going to be deleting points. And then we're going to do a random value node. And in this case, we're going to do Boolean, which means we have a nice slider value. So if I plug this into here, what I did was I plugged all the non-geometry, like before we created the curve to mesh, we just plugged that curve into a delete geometry, said delete the points. This random value, because the slider's in the middle, it's deleting half of the available points that's getting plugged into here. So now it's not going to be quite as heavy when we put an icosphere on it. So if I go ahead and bring my radius down to like 0.01, plug this here, we now have a random distribution of icospheres, but I want far fewer than that. Maybe something like this. Bring up my subdivisions, and then you can adjust the radius. Honestly, this default scale is quite nice. I might leave it at that. I don't know. We'll see. So far, this is really cool. We have available movement. The spheres actually stay on our curves. And then now that I'm looking at this multiply node, the strength could be lower. That was pretty aggressive. Something like this. Cool. So now we have the curves modeled. We have this sphere, the easiest modeling of the day. Now what we need is all of those particles that were flying around in this space. So what I want to do is, since this is named spiral, we'll just call this one. What I want to do is create a brand new set of geometry nodes for that. Technically, we can just build this whole particle system in this particular node tree, but I kind of want to have access to it over here and just kind of consolidate it. A massive node tree is more hassle than it needs to be if it's just sort of a simple scene like this. So what I'll do is create a new plane, and I'll just call this particles. And then we'll create, now we have available to create a new node tree, and let's throw an icosphere in here. Plug that there. We will bring up the subdivisions, bring up the radius, and what I wanted to do is just fill up right here, and then we're going to get a transform geometry node and just bring him in like this. Just like that. And then maybe we can, from my experience, I want to bring him up a little bit too. All right, cool. So now we can create all of our particles within the volume of this object. So what we can do is get a mesh to volume, and then now we have this volume information to now place particles inside of. And I'm going to go ahead and make the object a little bit bigger, but this is now what we have. So we can do a distribute particles. So distribute points in volume, and then that's going to create our ability to make all of these particles, which is really cool. And so what I want to do now is get a set position to animate them. So do a set position, do a noise texture, and we'll use color. Now make sure you're using color because RGB provides 3 axes that the particles can be animated on. Factor just provides black and white. Those are only 2 values, so it's not going to behave in the way that we want. Actually, I'll just show it to you. So click on normalize so we don't have to reposition it. We'll plug factor in. I'll go 3D to 4D. So see how that's behaving. That is what happens when we plug black and white values into an offset that's combining the X, Y, and Z. So it's sort of fighting the fact that there's 2 colors, there's 2 values, but there's 3 axes. Color now provides more than just 2 values to animate. And so now when we play with the W, we get something that makes a little bit more sense. And so that's what we want. I'm going to bring my scale to 1, my detail down, and we're going to have something like this, far more satisfying. And we'll go ahead and loop that animation. We'll create and loop the animation in the animation portion of this tutorial. Let's go ahead and create these things. Now, on the animation, the particles are not actually like spherical particles. They're actually these flat planes. They're curved, they're mesh circles with a metallic material with the point of creating this reflection. So when it rotates the right way and it reflects the area light, it has this really bright point and almost like glitter essentially. So we're creating like large space glitter and it creates a really nice effect. So that's what we're going to be doing here. So let's go ahead and do a instance on points. We're going to get a mesh circle and bring the vertices down to 6, and we'll plug it here. So now we have that. We'll do fill type of ingon. So now we have all of this craziness. We can bring the radius down to something like this for now. It will get smaller. Now what we need to do is randomly rotate these guys. So I'm going to bring the density of the distribute higher. And we're going to get a random value node, and we want it set to vector so we get a little bit more rotation optionality. So we'll plug factor into vector. We'll bring this up. We'll bring that down. And if we wanted to animate it, we can just go like, whoosh. They're just going through space doing crazy things. I'm going to go ahead and make the sphere that's holding all these a little bit bigger. There we go. And then honestly, a little bit taller. Okay. So now we can go ahead and just kind of play with the size of all of these guys, something like this. And then I want quite a few more. And so what's going to happen is when we animate it, we're going to animate the object on the Z. And then we're going to animate the individual object's rotation. And we're also going to animate their position with the noise texture, so we get this really wonderful dynamic motion, and that's reflecting the light, and it's just simply awesome. And that's the game. So now that we're done modeling, essentially, we can now go into the portion of animating all of these things. So I'm going to give my end frames 500. This is going to be a 500 frame animation. Let's start with the curves first. So the first thing we need to animate is the wave texture, and that's going to be the easiest thing. So I'm going to hit the back arrow to frame 0, and very important, if you're new to animation, in your preferences in the animation tab, your default interpolation, make sure it's linear if you're creating an animation that loops. So bring your phase offset to 0. We want to make this phase offset a looping animation, so I'm going to hit I, and we're going to do 2 times pi, or 2 asterisk pi. And now this is going to animate really slowly. So we have that. We want just a really subtle, slow movement. Now we need to animate all of our particles. So just click on the particles here in geometry nodes, and let's just animate the W. Well, let's do that last because that's going to take a little bit of effort. So what I want to do is go back to frame 0 and animate the rotation of this object. So I'm going to hit I, go to the very end, and type in 360. Now, if you think this is too fast, then add more frames to your animation. If you think it's too slow, add fewer frames to the animation, or instead of doing 360, do 720, which is 2 rotations. So you can kind of play with that for your speed, but this is just a very simple 360 rotation animation. Now, we're going to kind of cheat a little bit on looping the movement of them moving around. It's going to be it's not going to be very noticeable in terms of what we're going to do. So we're going to do a boomerang animation. We're going to break some rules and be bad. So I'm going to hit I on the max of the random value, go to the very end, hit I again, so that the beginning and the end are the same. Here in the middle, just kind of eyeball how much rotation you want them to have. I just don't want them to be perfectly still. So now when they move around, they're going to rotate a little bit and catch that light a little bit more. And then the last thing to animate in a loop is this W of the noise texture. So let's do that. Bring your W to 0. We're going to duplicate it here and get a mix color node. And make sure you plug color into B. And make sure these two nodes are exactly the same in terms of their values. So we're going to hit, we're going to bring the factor over to the left over here. We're going to hit I, go to the end, and I'm just going to type in 3 on the W and hit I, bring this over here. And then right here on the W, now that we're at frame 0 on this lower one, we're going to hit I, go to the very end. And because we did a positive 3 on this one, we're going to do negative 3 here. Okay, so now these particles are moving around. They're rotating. Hopefully they're going to kind of catch the light a little bit better. On the random value, let's go back to where it's yellow. I want them to rotate a little bit more. There we go. There we go. We're getting a little bit more of an interesting movement with the rotation, with the W movement, with the large scale rotation of everything. And we can even bring up our density a little bit on the volume. And we have a really, really cool looking scene. And then this over here is moving very subtly. The last thing we're going to animate is the material that's going to go on this guy, but we'll do that in a minute. Notice on the little one, you can kind of tell that it's low poly. So on the smaller one, which is the one up here, we can bring that resolution to like 300. There we go. Now it's nice and smooth. And we can go ahead and start shading. So let's click on the shading tab and let's first build the material on the sphere because I think it's the coolest one and it's just the most high effort one really. I messed up on my windows. I need to go back to timeline. There we go. Okay, so let's build the planet material. It's simple, but it's effective and it's cool. So we're going to go back to sort of old Ducky 3D and make a cool material. I haven't done this in a long time. So we're going to go ahead and get in a color ramp. And honestly, I'm going to split this in half. I really need to go ahead and make my defaults a little bit better. Okay, so we're going to get a color ramp and a bump node. We're going to get 2 color ramps. We're going to plug our bump node here, a distance of 0.1, and then bring that strength pretty far down, something like this. Then plug these into the height and the color. So let's go ahead, get a noise texture, and we're going to hit Control T, Object, and we're going to use color. And here's a fun trick that I think everyone should know. And if you don't know it, this is a great time to learn it. If you want to make a very, very highly detailed and very organic looking noise texture, don't just use one noise texture. First, use the color socket and then do another noise texture using the color socket. And that's going to give you a lot more detail, a lot more information. So what happens is I can bring a scale up, bring up my detail, and then my roughness, and you just get something highly detailed and organic off the bat that's not super default noise texture-y looking. So now that we have this, what I want to do is get another bump node, and we're going to make the cracks that also have the light. So we're going to get a Voronoi texture, and we're going to get a map range because we do need to have a little bit more control over the crunching of this thing. So we're just going to go ahead and get a new set because we're going to kind of mess with it over here and plug distance into value. And right here on F1, we're going to go to distance to edge. And then we're going to plug result into height. Now what we want to do right here on from max, just hold down shift and make that value smaller until you start to see this happening. There we go. And then we'll just bring that scale up till we have just these really huge cracks. But what I want to do is add more detail because it's pretty planar. Again, if you've been watching my channel for a long time, you know what I'm about to do. Right here on the vector line, we're going to add some detail. So we're going to do the same exact thing we did where we're creating two noise textures. Because if we're adding detail to those cracks, we want the detail to complement the detail we have up here. So that's really the main point. And then we can bring that detail to 12. So now the cracks are completely gone. So what we can do here is get a mix color, plug the object coordinate into B, so right here. And what this is going to do is essentially create a nice bypass. So if we bring the factor to the right, it's as if these guys are gone. And then we could start to feed a little detail into this, just like this. And so now it looks a lot more organic. What we need to do now is look at this in cycles because we want these I want these cracks to be a lot smaller, but they only can get so small in Eevee. So this is the time we're going to switch over to cycles. So I'm going to switch over to cycles, use my GPU. As you can see, I haven't set up my defaults yet. And then I'm just going to turn off reflective and refractive. And then on volumes, bring this up to 10 and bring the steps down to 50. That's really going to help your render time. Okay. And then you can optimize this, but we're not going to do that right now. So let's hop into cycles and just bring some lights in. Okay. So I just want to bring maybe something like that, maybe. So on the from max 0.005, and then now we can just go ahead. I'm going to bring my color ramp in a little bit to give this a little bit more contrast on the planet texture contrast. And then let's go ahead and open up the emission of our planet. So we're going to get a color ramp. We're going to plug our map range. No, we're going to plug our distance and color into color. And then we need to go ahead and flip the color ramp so that when we do this, it's actually going to feed. It's actually going to feed into the cracks of our planet. So I don't know. There we go. Now we have that. And then we can go to the white and just make it nice and red. So now that we are here, we finished texturing the planet. The planet looks nice. He looks cool. He's ready to live. We need to go ahead and add in a texture on the really thin wire that's up in here. So we're going to go back to geometry nodes. And the small wire exists here. So this line needs a set material. And I'm just going to leave the rest of the chords just materialless because it'll just be that color that I want anyway. And so what I'll do over here is I'll create a emission material. We'll make it red so that we can see it easier. And grab it there, and then we can go back to shading. So now we have those chords with the red. So what I want to do is get a color ramp, plug it in, make this nice and red. There we go. We're going to get a noise texture, and we'll plug the factor here, and then we'll just do Control T, object coordinate. So let's bring up that brightness a little bit. We can bring this in, and we'll start to see that color happen. I'm going to turn off my scene light so we can see it better. So I'm just going to bring the scale up quite a bit. And this is going to solidify that, like, this is a large scale scene. So there are lots of large scale details like this noise texture. All right, so now that we're here, we just need to focus on, we do need one more material, which is going to be these particles we're seeing all over the place. So we'll go back to geometry nodes. We need to click on particles, set material. We're going to make a very simple material here. Just make it metallic and no roughness, and grab it here. And then we do need to scale down these particles. They are too big. Okay. So let's just go ahead and set up our camera. So I'm gonna hit Shift A, get a camera, try to think about my composition, Control Alt 0, snap it to view, and then in the camera settings, we're just gonna bring in a focal length of 20, G, middle click, and then I'm gonna hit R and set up my composition like this. So now we need to set up our big light. So I'm gonna hit the tilde key, go to the front, just so we're not rotated. So think about where the camera is, and the light needs to come in this direction. So on the world brightness, I'm gonna bring this down to black, Shift A, we're gonna get an area light, and I'm gonna hit G and move it over like this. Bring it up, I'm hitting G and middle click. I don't know why this always is the most frustrating part, which is positioning my light. Okay, and then I'm just gonna go and make it a disc. So right now it's not really gonna give me much. I need to do two things. First, I'm gonna give my power of 140. In the volume, we're gonna give ourselves in the world settings, go to the volume and give yourselves a principled volume, and then just bring it to a point like this. And then the area light, we're gonna bring that spread to like 30, maybe even smaller. And then this area light also just needs to be bigger. There we go. So this is what we have so far. I think I want to position him to be a little bit farther over here. There we go. Scale it down a little bit. Hit R, just kind of rotate it. And then in the color, I'm just gonna give it a slightly blue color like I always like to do. And there we go. We have this really cool looking planet. I would definitely make the cracks here a lot darker. They're a little too bright, they're a little too loud. But animation wise, the animation is all set up. As you can see, we have these little highlight points where these sort of space glitter things are catching the light in really random points and really random moments. Here and here. And if you were to add like a glare node, it would really pop. But that's sort of the point there, and just adds this interest. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of depth of field just to make this feel a little bit more real. So I'm going to get an empty so I can tell it exactly where I want to focus. So right there. And then in the camera settings, we'll just go back to cycles, depth of field. I'm going to grab that empty and then bring my f-stop really low. So I'm going to do like 0.8 f-stop. No, that makes it look macro. I'm going to do 1.5 just to kind of blur these guys out. Maybe we'll do f-stop of 2. There we go. I like that a lot better. So let's just go ahead and do one render just to see how this looks. All right, so this is the 4K render. I really love how the light kind of hits here, hits down here. Just looks awesome. But this is our final piece of animation. We can see it's doing its thing, animating, looks awesome, looks nice. I would recommend to do a PNG sequence and then just pick a folder, throw it in there. Or if you want Blender to just render out a MP4 for you, you just click on FFmpeg video, color management, the encoding, go to MP4 or QuickTime if you want. I'm gonna stick to MP4 and then perceptually lossless. I'm gonna go ahead and do 300 frames denoised and then just render animation. And when you're done, you'll have something really cool like mine. Thank you guys for checking this out. Thank you guys for supporting me here on Patreon. I thought this was, I was about to do the YouTube outro, but then I realized this is for Patreon. So thank you guys for supporting me here on Patreon. Hope you enjoyed this. You can check out the file. It is attached. And I'll see you guys in the next one.